All right, so we're going to be, Finance Committee's coming to order. It's 7:04 on January 25, 2002.
2022.
2022, thank you. Yeah, not 2002. So I'd just like everybody to go around and just say your name so we can see who's present. So Phil, we'll start with you.
Yep, Phil Landry, FinCom.
Oh,
Okay.
that's okay, Mike, you go ahead.
Michael Ledbeck, FinCom.
Lynn Mazzulli, Finance Committee.
Kevin Moore, Finance Committee.
Sandy Kuipers, Finance Committee.
Dick Vandenberg, FinCom.
Howard D'Amico, FinCom.
Okay, we have enough for a quorum. We will begin. So if you look at your agenda, everybody, the first item is a message that I had written for the annual report. Just did everybody get a chance to look at it, and does anybody have any problems with it? Or any edits you'd like to propose? Everybody good?
You may want to just tell them that I did put that.
Okay, go ahead, Jean. Yeah.
I just, for those in the viewing audience, I did add the reserve fund transfer history to the bottom of the message for the Finance Committee. I will forward that to you tomorrow, but it really is just the votes that you had taken, the appropriation that we received, leaving a remaining balance of $18,850.
Any questions on that, everybody? So what we're endorsing is the message to our fellow citizens with the information on the reserve fund. Any objections to that, anyone? Any objections to just endorsing it unanimously?
That's fine.
Yeah.
Okay, so hearing no objection, we'll endorse that unanimously as presented. So thank you, everybody. All right, Matt, you have the floor. So our first item, letter A there, is just where do we stand in current FY22? Any updates for us that we should be aware of, Matt?
Where we stand in fiscal 22 now.
So we're good to go? Okay, how about Eugene? Anything currently that we need to be aware of in our current fiscal year?
No, the only thing that I made the committee aware of was the vacancy in the principal assessor, and that we're having to use an outside consultant for that position. That is a concern for me, and it's something we'll have to address, on a month-to-month basis, but that's really my biggest concern right now.
Where do we stand on that?
Well, right now, we're not advertising till probably the end of this fiscal year, so
Okay.
we'll continue to use Mayflower for that position.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions for either Gene or Matt on where we stand currently with our finances?
Yeah, do we have a kind of an update or three-quarter of the year update as to where we stand? Any kind of actual tangible numbers to look at?
Gene, I'll defer to you on that. Is there,
I just don't remember seeing anything on like an update in where we are type of thing.
well, I put it on the agenda, Phil, just in case there was something of note that either Gene or Matt needed to share with us. So it's just sort of a standard thing on the agenda in case there's something that's significant. But so it wasn't necessarily that we needed a new report. It was just, was there anything outstanding that we needed to be aware of? So that doesn't sound like there is, other than the assessors, right? Okay, anybody else on that?
No.
Okay, Mr. Wojcik, you have the floor for our budget process going into our new budget season. I know you were speaking to the selectmen about this the other night, and just what are your thoughts at this point, Matt, as we get ready to start the budget?
I'm going to try to share my screen and not talk over myself because I can hear myself through the TV in the wall. Can Everybody see my desktop here?
Yes.
We can see it. I'm not sure I can read it too well because the print's kind of tiny from where I'm sitting, but I can see it all right.
So what will happen is that you will all be assigned a Town of Douglas email address. So you will have an email address in our domain, which will allow us to share documents with you and send group emails and have a common calendar and announcements that are automatically updated to you, including when new documents are posted and when meetings are posted. We tried this last year with your non-town emails, and it was a fail. So even those of you who had an account with Microsoft, you weren't able to see things. We do pay on the basis of the number of email addresses that we have, but at this point, the efficiency to our operation is really outweighs the cost of having you all in our domain with an email address and a suite of software. What I have open on my screen is the application called Sharepoint, which is for lack of a better way to explain it, it's a website, right? It's a website within our domain. So the Finance Committee has its own place. And we can upload documents to that. We can post a calendar. I've turned off the chat function so that nobody can make any mistakes on the Open Meetings Act side of things. So you will not be able to communicate or chat or blog or do anything like that on the SharePoint. But when you click on, I'm going to click on the Finance Committee SharePoint. You'll see there are calendar icons for announcements. You'll see activity, which is any recent discussions or documents that have been posted. And then over on the right-hand side, there's a list of documents. And as Gene and I pull together background documents, and as we work on the budget, you will have access to everything that we're working on as it is done in progress. So I'm going to open the fiscal 23 budget materials folder, and I have 2 documents in there right now. One of them is a spreadsheet I created a long time ago when I started working here in 2017. You capture budget forecast as well as budget historicals for the town.
So Matt, prior to your arrival, there was no actual keeping of records of budgets and expenditures?
Well, of course there was. It just was, a lot of it was hard copy. But it's always going to be in the general ledger. And the way the town accountant runs the town, tracks your dollars. But Munis is a general ledger program. It is not a financial forecasting program. It doesn't have the flexibility of Excel to allow you to run what-if scenarios. It's an accounting program. It's designed to accurately record and cross-reference accounting entries. It's not really designed to do what I do with this spreadsheet. There are a lot of sheets here. I'm not going to drag your meeting through it. But from the control panel, one can change some of the most important variables that we face in terms of the year-over-year increases in everything from the school department budget to the rate of increase year-over-year in our health insurance working rate, our COLAs for non-union town employees. And so this is a quick and dirty control panel, so you can run scenarios from here, and then the bottom line of the budget will be this line that says surplus or deficit, and it'll show you about where we ended up. The idea, of course, is always to present you with a balanced budget based on the revenue assumptions that we make when we present the budget for adoption before the end of the fiscal year, so the first week of May at town meeting. Of particular interest, there'll be two sheets here that you'll be very interested in. One is revenue. So we have a revenue budget that Gene and I worked out quite a while ago. It starts in fiscal 16. It's forecasted out through fiscal 26. It is based in large part on the limitations of Prop 2.5, the impact of new growth, excluded debt, which is collected from the taxpayer, but is not, it's shown in our budget, but it doesn't really affect or squeeze out our spending because it's excluded. Estimated local receipts, there's a reconciliation of our state aid. And what you'll end up with, by the time you get to the bottom, is total funds available for appropriation, and that'll be the number that we attempt to balance to after we review all the needs of the various departments of the town. So this year, some of these numbers have the excluded debt in them, because we're going to raise that money, and then in the budget we'll show a debt line item, or actually a series of line items for debt. So we don't really have almost 32 million. It's lower than that, and I'll show you a presentation in a second. The last sheet I would draw your attention to this evening is the budget itself. So this is how we work with our department heads and committee chairs to get budget submissions and requests. So it goes through every single line item. The numbers correspond to Gene's general ledger account numbers. So the ambulance department is Department 231. And then you'll see these activity codes here. These reflect general spending categories that can be cross-referenced, and we can. So for instance, if you want to know what every single salary is across all of town government, there's another spreadsheet here that summarizes the activity codes. But let's stick with the budget. This is line by line, virtually everything that they're going to ask for. It's not what we show town meeting, and it's not what we put in the FinCom flyer. In the FinCom flyer, we roll everything up. Compensation rolls up to compensation, expenses rolls up to expenses, and those are presented by department. But here you're actually going to get the breakout detail. I have tried for the past 3 years to find a way to send my department heads their respective pieces of this budget so that as they fill in their numbers, it would populate my master spreadsheet. And then you would have a requested budget. Until we had SharePoint, it was pretty hard to do because I had people sending me things, they would change them. Doing a 5-year projection on a very tight budget is almost a tedious exercise, but we're no longer in that position. So what I want to do is I'm going to create this spreadsheet. I'm going to rename it, call it requested budget. And I will have forms that I send to all of my department heads where they will populate their budget, both for their personnel and for their expenses, using historical figures as their baseline. And that will be their budget request. And we'll be able to see the bottom line effect of that. And what I suggested to the select board and suggest to you is that when your department heads come in to explain their budget to you, rather than have me sit and try to reconcile behind the scenes and try to get everything to balance, I'll conduct that process and participate with you in your meeting to suggest to department heads what they might want to change, also to suggest to the entire process what parts of their budget requests are likely to survive. At the end of the day, we have to balance, right? So we have parameters that we have to operate within. And what I'm hoping to have the budget process reveal is how we prioritize the requests of the various departments. So I hope we're not in the business of saying, oh, that's a great idea, Chief, let's fund everything the Chief asked for tonight and just pass on it, tell Matt to put it in the budget. That's not really what I'm hoping for. I'm hoping that after everybody has put their requests in, we'll all have a conversation about what priorities should be for this fiscal year, what might be able to wait for another fiscal year, another revenue year, and hopefully tease out those things that we have to do because they're either legally necessary or operationally. Almost everything's contingent on certain things happening operationally. So that is the spreadsheet that I will tell you is always available to you. And so if we ever had a spot where we said, just print out the budget and that's going to be it, we just hit the print button because as long as it is in balance, we can present it. Obviously, it goes through a lot of tweaks. The part of the process that is most tedious for all of us is personnel, which is why I always try to get the personnel budget done first in the personnel supplement. Because once we all recognize the fact that we're an employer, if we have a reason to let somebody go, then we should. But otherwise, it's a stable employment arrangement, and there are changes every year due to steps and COLAs, and that becomes not a fixed part of the budget, but a very sticky part of the budget that's unlikely to change, regardless of our revenue limitations. If we're going to staff for the situation that we're in, it will cost us a certain amount. And that's where a lot of the pressure comes back onto the expense budgets. And you'll see over time, expense budgets have been very flat because we don't generally add to the operational expenses of the town, even as we do very modest personnel increases. So this is one document. I would like to switch gears. Do you guys have a slide deck in front of you now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, Mr. Chairman, if I have your indulgence, I'm going to march through these 12 slides. I'll stop after each one and see if anybody has any questions.
Matt, I have one question at this point, and that is, any idea when we will have access to the Sharepoint?
So I put in the request today. Typically, the IT staff is here on Wednesday, so I'm hoping they take care of it tomorrow. You will be sent a link to whatever email address we are currently using for you, and you'll have to log in, create your own password, and then you will notice that you have access. There'll be another email in your town email folder that will invite you to join the SharePoint.
And then, just to double check, Matt, in terms of the actual numbers in the spreadsheet, you are the one that enters them, right? I can't, on my own, decide to put in $500 for something, right?
You can so the master version is something I will control and I'll give read-only access to.
Okay.
But I will allow you to download and copy that spreadsheet. So if you want to change the numbers however you want to, you'd be able to do that. But for version control purposes, you won't be touching my document. You'd be working on your own.
Gotcha, okay. Thank you.
If you mess it up real good, we'll just start over. We're not going to try to fix it. All right, so you can see this deck, I hope, and that's all you can see. I thought it would be helpful if we all just went back to basics for a second and looked at how the town raises the money it spends every year. And to look also both historically and prospectively on what is generating growth. The blue line at the top is total revenues. And when you look at the shape of the curves below it, the orange curve, which is the levy, which is real estate taxes, and personal property tax, I believe, is in there. That is what's driving growth. The state aid to the town of Douglas has been flat for years. It's a function of many different things. The pilot program has never been fully funded. Chapter 78 to the town of Douglas is actually quite generous, but it's not going to go up anytime soon because our enrollment doesn't militate for that to happen. Then local receipts and all other revenues are actually a very small part of our revenue picture. They're still a necessary and important part, but you'll notice they're just a lot smaller. The bulk of the town's revenue is coming from the levy, and that is also the bulk of the growth of the town's revenues being raised from the levy. Are there any
Now, what
questions?
happened between 2018 and 19 on all other income? Looks like it took a nosedive.
We either recharacterized something there or we had something drop off. So from 18 to 19, what you're actually seeing is the town stopped using free cash to balance the budget. So there's, I don't know how big this number is for you, but there's a 600,000 here. I'm waving my cursor
Yeah.
around.
Yeah,
You notice it's never come back?
right. So they used to use free cash as income?
Yes,
As a funding source,
as a funding source for the operating budget.
yes.
Okay.
Are there any other questions here? So far where we are for 23, when I say preliminary, I mean preliminary. It's January 25th. We have to have a number to try to work towards, but we know that when we get the cherry sheet and drafts of the governor's budget, these numbers will change. But based on our best guess today, writing our exam book today, our revenues outside of excluded debt, 29.8 million, which should be up from about 29.2 million. It's about a 2.1% increase year over year. We have made our typical assumptions of raising to the cap under Prop 2.5, so the levy would go up 2.5%. Local receipts would be up 2% year over year. New growth conservatively, very conservatively estimated at 150,000, and state aid will be flat. Unrestricted general government assistance or aid. At the MMA conference on Friday, Lieutenant Governor Polito promised the people in the room that the administration was seeking a 2.7% increase. We get a little bit of money from other. It's not a huge revenue source for us, but if it went up 2.7%, it would be nice to have. What are our wild cards? These are things that I really can't estimate at this point. We'll get more refined sense over the next couple of weeks, several weeks. School choice out, excise taxes. These next two topics are closely related. Building permits and new growth. We know that there's a lot of economic development going on. The timing of it is frightening, to be honest. They want to be in the ground very soon after the winter is over. And the nature of these structures is that they are built very, very quickly. And you'll notice that over on the Serendipity site, the Route 16 exit on 146, that building went up pretty fast. And the ones that are being built in the Douglas area are going to be built just as fast. So we'll be collecting all these building permit revenues, some of them in this fiscal year and the rest in the next fiscal year. So exactly how that breaks out and how much impact it has, we shall see. Buildings of this size usually command very large declared values and thus large building permit revenues. New growth. The value of the town is certified every December 31st, and new growth usually comes in the fall as the revenue is raised from the new growth. Partial completion of construction will count if it's substantial completion, and therefore I don't know exactly what that number is going to be. I can almost, well, let me put it this way. I am confident it will be well over 150,000. But just how much, I don't know. Cannabis revenues, we try not to plan on these at all. The Department of Revenue frowns upon that practice. Having said that, our relationships with our cannabis grows and retailers in town are beginning to solidify. We've been receiving checks on the scheduled date that we were supposed to receive them. I don't have any reason to believe that we would not collect those revenues in fiscal '23. The businesses are very strong. They're making a big splash in their industry. So I really can't see why they would cease operation for any reason. And the amount of investment has been massive, so I don't see them closing their doors. There will be some more one-time revenues from the sale of real estate. We have not yet realized or recognized the revenue from the sale of town-owned land between Gilboa and Northeast Maine. While it went out to RFQ and we had a successful bidder, there's been a title issue there that has held up the final settlement, so the $400,000 check is still in the vault. So that at least will be one transaction that we expect to complete very soon. And then there's this, when the town bought into our joint purchasing group for health insurance, we had an equity buy-in. The three original partners had to put money into the kitty, into the trust fund, to satisfy claims until we collected our first full month or second month of working rate. At this point, the trust fund is very robust. We are over the bylaw limit in our bylaws for equity, so we need to discharge out the equity buy-in that the partners originally put in, which is good news for us. We had transferred money out of free cash to make the buy-in, and it's all coming back to us. Jean, do you remember what that equity buy-in was by a quantity?
I do not.
Does 600,000 sound wrong?
It does sound
I think
wrong.
it's less.
I do.
I know you don't like to estimate, but it's a number we need to have handy because it's coming back. There will be some rate relief this year. By rate relief, I mean the taxpayer will see a difference. Or there will be a difference factored into how the rate is calculated because there will be a roll-off of about $430,000 worth of annual debt service because the note is over, the note is paid out. Are there any questions about where we stand on revenue at this point in our estimate?
Yes, new growth estimate, what's the percentage? Everything else is in percentage? Do you have a rough idea?
Well, it's a dollar amount.
Zero. If these numbers are too small, tell me and I will try to. You want me to make them bigger so you can see them?
Yes, please. So if we're saying 150,000 new growth, and everything else was put in as like 2%.
So it doesn't exactly work the same way. So
Okay.
Can you see these numbers now?
Yes, okay, thank you.
So new growth in 16 was 150,000.
Okay,
And then 17 was probably our leanest year at 109. But then the real estate market picked up, construction picked up. So you went up to 199, then 247, actually 248. Then fiscal 20 was 400,000.
Oh, yeah, look at that.
And the most recent number that we certified was 345,000,
okay,
730. So when we estimate 150, you can see where we're getting the number, right? It's a historical number.
okay.
It's certainly more than zero, but it's not at these heady levels of a robust real estate market.
Okay, thank you.
Having said that, right, we all know what's going on. We drive around town, we can see the homes being built, we know that there's economic development projects. But our best estimate on when those big buildings will join our tax base will be in fiscal 24, not 23.
It makes sense.
Pat, I saw a big article on those buildings recently, and they weren't specific about the warehousing. It was, who was going to be, doing that? Is that those names out publicly yet?
No. And a swarm of bees will eat my eyes out if I tell you.
Nice. Well, I don't want to see that, Matt, so please don't
No,
say
you
it.
don't.
So Jean, you have those numbers there?
Thank you. There was a transfer on the May 6, 2019 from free cash for $227,370.
I think 600,000 is our total balance in the trust fund, so we'll be getting the 227 back.
Thank you.
Thank
In
you.
terms of our overall financial position, I just wanted to show you this. This is the history of free cash. The source here is a Division of Local Services. They have a Data Analytics and Resources Bureau. They track all these numbers for all 351 municipalities in the Commonwealth as of the certification date. So you can see here that free cash has improved steadily since 2013 and rather precipitously in the last 3 years.
That's for just the town of Douglas?
Yes.
And who has this money? Like, where is it? Is it held by the state? Is that what this is, a requirement?
Gene's got it all.
Dean, you got it at your house?
No, I do not. The only thing I wanted to make a comment, I did send you a old school email today before we're into Sharepoint, where it gave the free cash certification. I actually included the transfers that we did at the fall town meeting. The one thing I want to remind you of is that the reason why FY22 free cash is certified so high is because we didn't spend all of the money last year. So that begins our beginning number for the new fiscal year. So last year, we left free cash not transferred out of $1,403,000. So that's why you have a starting as a high point. Free cash is generally made up, just as a reminder, of turnbacks, so amount of the appropriation that the departments did not spend, as well as any variance between the estimated receipts and the actual receipts coming in. You'll notice also on one of the documents I sent today, I did highlight building revenue, because that did go up dramatically over the last couple of years, and even during the pandemic. So that was one of the printouts you received as well.
So Jean is always right, of course, so I'm going to agree with her. In fiscal 19 and 20, you see those looks like a little bit of a dip from 18. A couple of things happened there. First of all, free cash was no longer used for operating expenditures, but it was used extensively for capital, to buy vehicles and improve buildings. So after it was certified, we would draw down on it. We weren't rolling it over year. We were drawing down, so that kept the balance from growing too quickly. The real picture, though, for any community and where we stand with the bond rating agencies is what is the, and we're going to be only on the municipal side here, we're not going to talk about the schools, although a bond rating agency would look at the school situation as well as us. But what is the total reserves as a percentage of the operating budget?
Right.
So
Matt, what is that average in the state for, I don't know if you know what that might be, because you guys you looks like you're carrying about 10%, isn't it? Somewhere around.
we're a little bit north of 10% right now.
Yeah. So do you know what the average is in the state?
I don't, but I can find out for you. I mean, it's a worthwhile statistic to know.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, are we carrying a ton of extra cash, or are we shy of other towns?
No, the auditors generally like to look at 10%, 5 and 5. So they don't want you to spend all of, they want you to have a reserve there. I don't know the percentage either, but that's what if you listen to the audit and the exit conference, they're looking at 5 and 5.
When you say 5 and 5, what is
5
that?
from free cash, 5 from stabilization.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, roughly half and half. There are a lot of philosophies out there, and we have a community not far from us outside of Worcester that has a humongous free cash balance and almost nothing in stabilization. It is easier to transfer money out of free cash than it is to get money out of stabilization once it's put in, and that is one reason. The town that I live in has almost nothing in terms of free cash or stabilization. It's all been used for operating, and that's why we're in a shambles. 10% is pretty much, that number really stuck in my mind when we were doing the bond rating call for the refunding bonds that I believe the town issued. I'm going to forget exactly which year, was it 18 or 19? But being short of that 10% meant that we were not going to improve our bond rating. We just had insufficient reserves and too much volatility around the reserves. This stronger position, if we're able to hold it for a couple of years in a row, would tend to demonstrate that we deserve bond rating improvement.
So Matt,
This is a much better position. Really, the town was in its roughest spot in that 2009 to 2012 timeframe.
So Matt or Gene, as we look at, free cash, stabilization funds, reserve funds, those three are all pretty good shape in general, or are they all of equal, well, not equal importance, but like reserve funds, how do those line up, say, with stabilization funds, for instance?
Well, the reserve fund that you have control over?
Yeah,
That is just a money put aside that is available if departments have unforeseen extraordinary circumstances.
Okay.
So a $50,000 reserve fund, if the budgets are not, when we had very tight budgets, we also had 50,000, which I think was dangerous.
yeah.
Now that the budgets are, a little better off, I think it's a good place to be.
Does the stabilization fund work differently than a reserve fund?
The stabilization requires town meeting vote.
Oh,
So any transfer
okay.
from free cash or stabilization requires town meeting.
Gotcha.
And it takes a majority to go into stabilization, it takes 2/3 to go out. So free cash only takes a majority to come out.
Gotcha, okay. Thank you.
The reserve fund is controlled by the finance committee, and that's voted here. So the town meeting has already appropriated money for the FinCom to have control of should departments need additional funding for their departments based on unforeseen or extraordinary.
So the free cash and the stabilization fund need town meeting?
Correct.
Gotcha, okay.
The only thing I couldn't squeeze onto this chart because I didn't have free cash numbers going as far back as I have stabilization numbers. But the town of Douglas in that 2003, 2004, 2005 had a very strong fiscal position. The combination of free cash and stabilization in that time frame was very strong. So this is not new territory for the town. It's just, it's been a while since you've been here. I always think it's a good conversation to tell people how each dollar that gets spent out of the budget and what it's building for. And I'm picking my words very carefully. This is not a revenue dollar. It is a dollar spent. So for the money that we have put into the budget, how does it break out? 56% of each dollar that we spend, we're spending on education. That's Douglas Public Schools, Blackstone Valley Tech, Norfolk, and the bus contract that we carry in that bucket that we call education. We do not, for this budget conversation, although it's done elsewhere in the budget process, in this conversation, we don't have our school department retire its own expenses for non-teacher pension contributions, property and casualty insurance, health insurance. Those are accounts that are shared between the town and the school, but they're budgeted on the town side. So that 15%, that yellow piece of the pie, can be broken down between the school and municipality, as could the debt. So when we look at the quote-unquote budget book and we're talking about my departments, it's the orange piece and the gray piece. About 21% of each dollar that's spent by the town of Douglas is actually being spent by its municipal service functions or back office operations. I always think people should gauge their level of attention that they pay to the different budget items by this pie chart, because you could almost zero out all of the expenses on the municipal side of the budget, and if these other things grew, they would absorb it very quickly. It's only 6%.
Matt, do you know what percent of the shared expenses would be attributed to the schools? Ballpark.
I can arrive at that number for you. The majority of the pension expense is town, because the teachers are covered in their own plan. We don't contribute to that. That's a state thing. But we do cover non-teacher employees that contribute to Worcester County, Worcester Regional, sorry. But on the health insurance side, most of the census is coming from the school department because they're a much larger employer than all of the other departments combined. So I can break that out for you in a little bit more detail.
Just gut feeling, ballpark.
Of the 15%, probably 10% of that is schools.
Okay, good enough.
And the lion's share of the debt.
Yep. Okay. Thank you.
I think sometimes we all focus, and I'm not going to talk about anybody else other than myself. I get all worked up about BVT and the mechanics of how they bring their budget request in. We don't really have the opportunity to say yes or no. We're kind of stuck with it. But when you look at this chart, you can kind of see, while it is a lot of money, it has gone up quickly. It's dwarfed the Douglas Public Schools. And our education budget, that is what is generating the growth in the overall education budget is our own public school system. We're probably going to see, because I think demographically it's impossible for BVT to continue to grow at the rate they've grown in our budget for the past 4 years. It's just impossible. We'd have no students left. We'll probably see this level off a little bit, and the pressure will continue to come.
Which one's the BVT line?
Public school system.
Looks like it's underneath.
Matt, which line is the BVT line? I can't
The
tell.
dark blue is over.
It's gray, and I
Yeah.
think one of the things that's fascinating is it's about the same size as the school bus contract.
Yeah.
They're so close that they actually
Okay.
cancel each other out on the chart,
Yep. Okay.
which is food for thought, right? We spend as much to bus our kids around Douglas as we do to send everybody to BVT that goes.
Huh.
Okay? Any other questions before I move on? So we'll turn our attention quickly to the municipal budget components. What this tends to show is that our expense lines have been, they actually shrank for a while and have only gone up modestly. We've had any number of savings programs that we've engaged in to try to reduce the cost of operating our departments. But on the wage side, that blue line that's on top, we continue to be slightly behind other communities around us, and we're trying to catch up gradually without breaking the budget, but we still have to do catch up. A couple of things happened in fiscal 21. We renewed our contracts with both of our public safety unions, and I think it was in the middle of that year that we added an assistant chief in the fire department. But that would explain a good portion of why that went up there. So here's these shared accounts that we were talking about. Their trajectory is much more steep than our other accounts. So the health insurance offer, and I choose that word again very carefully, the health program that we offer people is not just the insurance. We also compensate people if they decide to waive our coverage or if they already have our coverage and they opt out. That's real money that goes out. And there's also the HSA program that is in this bucket. The nice thing about the gray line is that it has flattened out over the last 3 years, which is the result of our current arrangement, our self-insurance arrangement. And it's too early to tell. It's only 6 months into the benefit year. A little bit too early to tell how we're doing. We typically, because we have a high deductible plan, we don't have a nice, even flow of claims through our account. People use up their deductible and then they bomb us about 7 or 8 months into the year, and then they start hitting their insurance. So far, knock on wood, a number of the hallmarks of stability are present. So we have very few people hitting the attachment point on reinsurance, so we don't have a large body of big claims. Utilization is pretty uniform. There is, of course, always that small group that drives a lot of your claims, but so far they haven't been hitting stop loss. So I'm cautiously optimistic that at this point in the year, we have reason to think that. We certainly are in a good position to say that if our year-over-year increase is similar to last year or slightly lower, it's a reasonable assumption to make for budgeting purposes. Well, you'll notice retirement, our contributions to Worcester Regional and our property and casualty premium have doubled. So those two accounts, year over year, just absorb a huge amount of the new revenue. So going back to my preliminary revenue estimate, you saw it went up like $600,000, right? But between property and casualty, it's 60 grand and about 150 for retirement. That's 210,000 of the 600 is gone, just from insurance and retirement. Are there any questions about these accounts?
Can you remind me what the deductible is on the health insurance piece?
So I don't take it.
It's $2,000, $4,000, $2,000 for an individual, $4,000 for a family. The HSA is contributed to half. So we reimburse or put into the employee's account $1,000 and $2,000 respectively.
Okay.
Matt, can you talk about property and casualty a little bit for the future? I know we've had, in the last year or two, we've had a few large property casualty claims. Do you expect fiscal 24 to jump up even further?
Right now, I'm cautiously optimistic that based on the size of the claim and the fact that it was capped, limited our exposure to the look back. So the flood in the schools was over $900,000. The fuel spill in the town hall was capped at $500,000. But we are at this point close to 350% loss over premium. So we're going to be making this up to the Maya Trust Fund for quite a few years now. And the question is, how fast will they hit us for it? And it's a shame because other than property claims, the rest of the bundle here, whether it's workers' comp or professional liability, whatever, we're ridiculously low. But 11% loss ratio, it's incredibly low. As many of you know, we shopped this very aggressively this year. We had a broker bring in Travelers, and Travelers put together a package to compete with Maya. Ostensibly on its face, it looked like we may have saved a little bit of money, but when we really started digging at the coverages, what is covered, what is not, what the limits are, we determined that really Maya's product is much better for the town than Travelers was. And so the Board of Selectmen, after 3 very long, tedious meetings, voted to stay with Maya. And I don't think we'll shop this again for another 2 or 3 years. We wouldn't learn anything else that we don't already know. But we tried.
No, thank you.
So I just want to run through, we're not going to read all of these words. I'm going to try to stick to the main bullets, but these are the things that are costing me sleep at night. The first is we'll be in contract renewal talks with Gene, and we want to make some adjustments there. These are roughly in order of my priorities. So, second part of the budgeting process, we do have to capture and allow for a large premium increase in property and casualty. We just have to make sure when we look to see if the budget is balanced, that we leave some cushion to have to put that back in. And the reason why I'm talking about it that way is because that is the last number we will get. They will wait till the very last minute to give us our renewal. So we won't actually plug a number into the final budget until right before we go to town meeting. It's aggravating. All the municipalities complain, but that's how mine operates. The third bullet point that has to be in the budget is we need to capture all the recurring costs of the public safety radio system. We have a rental on a tower, and we have some service contract warranty. It's not a lot of money, but it has to be in the budget. It's not something I can skip. The fourth bullet point that I've thought a lot about is it's nice to have that huge amount of building permit revenue, but eventually somebody's going to go out and inspect all this stuff. They also have to do plan review before the permit is issued. And with all of the projects that we're going through and the complexities, I don't really think I'm being fair to the employee. The number of inspections that are being done weekly, because remember, we have to inspect everything. We have to inspect a foundation hole. We have to inspect a roof if it's been re-roofed, or a deck that's been installed. All those things get inspected even if they're not really huge projects or huge dollar amounts. He still has to get in his car and go out and go through the code process. And if he's doing 30, 40 a week, that's a huge investment of time. And plan review on some of these bigger, more complex modern buildings is a pretty significant undertaking. So I think I might be testing the market to get a part-time person on a temporary basis for the next couple of years to render assistance to the department. I don't want to form a relationship that lasts right out of the gate. I want to make sure it's temporary. But the fifth bullet point was originally probably my second highest, but I had to pump it down based on the things that reasonably had to do. But our non-union, non-contractual employees have, many of them, been on the top step of the town for 10 or 12 years and went through many years of no COLAs, and some years even people who were eligible for steps didn't get steps. And we're now, when we go out to hire somebody new, we're finding that we're not competitive. That the salary that somebody retired from the town of Douglas with is not even an acceptable entry-level wage for a brand new employee with minimal experience. That puts us in a very difficult position. So we've got to look at the trajectory that we put people into and correct it. So I've put a lot of detail there that we can get into as we go along, but I am beginning to work on this process now. I've interviewed all the employees, try to get a temperature on who's retiring, who's not. These kinds of steps need to be taken when there are revenue opportunities. And I think with the revenue picture being fairly robust for the next couple of years, this is the time to do this. We don't want to do it when big growth settles down and slows down. The next bullet point, we do have staff retirements pending. I know there's one for sure at Highway. There might be a couple more in the next couple of years. We only have 5 or 6 people working there, right? So 3 people leave, that's half. My concern here is that this is a different place to work in town as opposed to police and fire. Police and fire, we take the employee and they go through an academy. They get a physical agility test. They prove their commitment to employment with the town and good behavior and making their probation because they're committed to their chosen profession. Sometimes they don't make it, but most of the time they do. When we're hiring truck drivers and hoisting operators, we don't have the same rigor up front. So there's a part of me that says I'd like to almost overhire and make sure we have everybody we need. Because when it starts snowing, you gotta have people. The next bullet point, animal control. We are currently part of a regional operation that is really not stable. Good work is being done, and the individuals who are paid for this are working very hard, but they're stretched. And we have service delivery gaps, and we have concerns going forward about the best place for a shelter. So we're talking to a larger group of towns. So we're going to make our regionalization effort bigger. But that does mean that we'll probably have to add additional personnel. So the number we've been carrying for animal control in the budget has been artificially low for quite a while, and it will have to be adjusted upward. I'm confident that the budget process that the police chief in Uxbridge has been using is rigorous enough, and we're not going to break the bank with the thing, but it's probably going to be a good deal more than it has been in the past. The last bullet point on this page is not really about the operating budget. It is about the use of free cash and the prioritization of roads vis-a-vis other capital needs of the town. We have 86.6 miles of road. We have a pavement management study that you can all access if you want to see it. But to catch up with where we should be in terms of replacing damaged roadways and maintaining the roadways that are in good condition now, they wanted us to spend $1.3, $1.4 million a year. The program I'm contemplating would be a one-to-one match with our Chapter 90, so we'd be putting in about $360. I anticipate that the Board of Selectmen would have to pass a policy for the use of free cash and prioritization of this program. But if we got $360 from Chapter 90 and then we put in $360 of our own, that's about $720 a year. That's a pretty decent paving program, but it would still take many years to catch up to where we need to be. Any questions on that page before I move to the next one?
Hey, Matt, I had a quick question on the animal control. There's private, animal rescue, and then there's also private, capture or whatever you want to call the service. Do we have such a constant need for animal control that can't be handled out through just private contracts on an as-needed basis?
I think it's a good question for the chief when it comes to brief you on his budget, because a lot of those calls come into the police department. In a previous life, I worked in another town where we had a private animal control effort, and it was not a success. We had to pay for the lodging, the crates and the other housing facilities, regardless of whether we had animals in them. We also ended up with long-term tenants. A lot of people really don't want pit bulls, so they get picked up by a private ACO. It's at their discretion as to how long they keep that animal and how much they charge you to have it. So it was not a successful program at all. But that doesn't mean we wouldn't be. We would just have to do some research. But I would defer to the chief's understanding of just how many calls we get, because I think there are times when it's pretty busy.
Mm-hmm. And just go, the other question now is to the roadways, and so it seems like we have never had an annual budget line item for roadways, even though we're required to upkeep 86 miles of roads around here.
So Chapter 90 funds are available to be spent without further appropriation. So it doesn't appear in the budget, but the town's been getting $360 a year from Chapter 90. Now, what has been grabbing all that money have been these little bridges all around that keep falling in, or that have significant need of repair. So, yeah, the North Street Bridge was an expensive project. The Cedar Street Bridge is funded by the grant, as well as some Chapter 90 funds. But that's why you don't see a lot of paving going on. The money is just being eaten up with these small bridges and culverts that we've had to fix. But you are correct that it really has been a long time since there's been a disciplined paving program. Having said that, going back through some of my slides, you look at those lean years when there wasn't much free cash, there wasn't really a whole lot of money in stabilization. My recollection of those operating budgets, I wasn't here at the time, but I looked them over. You were cutting staff left and right. You were taking full-time people, making them half-time. Teachers, police officers went without COLAs. The budget situation was so tight that roads are always the first thing to go because they're expensive, and people look at the asset and say, that can last another 10 years, right?
Right.
So this is my last slide, I believe. Yep. So the last 5 things that are still, they're not as important as the previous group, but they are still important. I have had discussions with the school superintendent about the possibility of some shared staff to pick up some of the facilities management, oversight and strategy, and a part-time, at least, human resources person for onboarding and benefit management. We really are a very small staff here at Town Hall. We do a lot of the back office bookkeeping for the entire town, including the school department, the water department, and that includes processing payroll. So our assistant treasurer goes flat out, and to the extent that she's our benefits manager right now, it's another task on her plate. And I know on the school side, the human resources piece is something they're really asking for. Just because there's a fair amount of turnover from year to year, and there's a certain amount of work associated with new employees. But it's not a full-time thing. I don't see it as a full-time gig at all. The second bullet is actually one of the things that's nearest and dearest to me, but it's pretty low priorities. But our legal services budget, we've been getting by, folks. You know, the public servants that work for us as general counsel and as land use counsel and labor counsel have a lot of experience and a lot of insight. But we just don't pay them very much, and you get what you pay for. This isn't really about the quality of their advice as much as it is about the time they have to give us based on what we pay them. And I'm doing a lot of what I expect a town lawyer to do. And that makes me nervous on a number of levels. I mean, still, I'm not writing anything final. It's all being drafted and given to legal counsel. But even this week, I tried to delegate and get something off my plate for a land development agreement with one of our private partners in the project, and nobody has any time, so now me and the town planner are sitting here trying to pull this together. It's not tenable in the next 3 or 4 years to continue to pay $1,500 a month for general counsel and $2,500 a month for land use counsel. If you think of how often does the planning board meet, how often does Concom meet, how often does the zoning board meet, we've got one law firm that gives us 1 meeting a month based on the flat fee. But the committees they serve are meeting 5 or 6 times. So I'm uncomfortable with some of these meetings occurring without legal counsel present for the town. When applicants show up, they have attorneys. It's not a healthy place for the town to be. The next bullet point, we've been talking somewhat about training and picking up the training, both in the fire and ambulance department as well as in town hall, for some of the specialty certifications that people are seeking to be better at their jobs. I want to have at least some kind of conversation about inspection vehicles. We have inquired with Maya, the way this works, if you drive in your personal vehicle on town business and there's an accident, Maya picks up your deductible, and Maya picks up anything that your personal insurance doesn't pay. But you actually still have your personal insurance company paying a good chunk of that claim. And that's going to be against you as the employee, against the rates you pay. because that claim came against you. You may even be dropped. Look, when there's not many inspections to do and there's not a lot of activity in town, so be it, right? And you need to do an inspection, get in your car and go and build the town for the mileage. But when you're on the road all the time, it might be a good idea to have a town vehicle. We're also trying to be part of the change that is occurring in the economy with respect to electric vehicles. We have electric charging stations outside here at Town Hall. There are 4 places to plug in. The electric vehicles are not eligible for green communities, so we can't get this through a grant. We'd have to put it into the budget as a purchase. And lastly, every time I go to advertise, we're trying to scrape up pennies here and there. Sometimes the money can be drawn from the procurement, the overall funding provided by town meeting, but hiring employees and doing other things that require advertising, again, we're busy and we have not properly budgeted for this one line item. So that's where I'm at in terms of our current status. The only topic, Mr. Chairman, I have not covered tonight that I do want to have a specific agenda discussion about in the future is the revenue planning going forward. And I want to make sure that we're fully transparent with all involved on how Massachusetts communities accommodate rapid economic development, especially when they don't have a very big commercial base. And now we're going to have, we could see a commercial tax base in town that would be almost 22% of the value of the town. That's an extraordinary change from whatever it is now, 4%. So how does that new revenue and new value impact the overall financial condition of the town and future budgeting? It's a conversation that's worth having. It would make this meeting tonight really long, and I've said enough already. I'm losing my voice, but that's a conversation I think we should have, because I think my department heads, especially on the public safety side, I want to have a plan with them that if they're going to make staffing requests, that they focus on fiscal 24 and have a strategy for 24 and 25. And so this conversation we've had in the past about, well, do you have all the people you need? There's a backstory to that. If we do or do not have all the people that we need, I can tell you one thing, we've got no place to put them. There is no place to put them. So there are some conditions precedent that need to be addressed before we can have a full-blown conversation about staffing. But as the town approaches 10, 11, 12,000 in population, we will no longer be able to sustain services with the headcount that we have now.
And is that growth in commercial revenue based on the 2 main commercial property developments we have going on?
No. So there's going to be a lot more than that.
Okay.
Matt, when you say 10, 11, 12,000 ballpark, what are we currently at?
A little over 9. So CMRPC is using a figure of like 9,026 as an estimate for Douglas. But remember, daytime population would also include everybody who works here. So some of these commercial operations may have several hundred people working in them.
Do you have a projected perception on 10,000 even?
I'm sorry, I don't know.
When we would hit 10,000?
Well, is there a projection? No. Do I want to venture one? Not really. Some of that will, Howard, the biggest question that's going to drive that is high-density housing and whether or not the town does any additional 40B projects or elder-only community, over 55. That's going to have a really big impact on whether or not we approach 10,000.
But from your statement a minute ago, you don't see it imminent. It's not already in the works.
It's not tomorrow, but in the next 5 years,
Okay.
that's 200 a year. You know, again, I think that it is very hard for any of our land use bodies to discourage the use of 40B or other high-density housing arrangements when we are so under, we just don't have that kind of housing stock right now. We do not have a diverse housing stock in Douglas. And you're going to find grant monies tied to this and a whole bunch of other incentives put in place above and beyond what they can already do with their comprehensive permit. As our population as a country is aging, the need for, you know, a 4,000 square foot house on a 3-acre lot, you know, that diminishes as you get older. People want to stay in the community where they've lived and contributed, and that's, we're hearing some of those representations already.
And then, Matt, if I can just follow up on the, when you said 22% heading forward, has there been any discussion about, as the commercial revenue increases, the residential rate being, you know, decreased to keep the revenues going up on a consistent basis, or is the perception that the residential rate will stay about the same and the commercial will substantially add to the revenue base?
I have been trained to never answer that question.
Fair enough. I'm not going to go against your training, okay?
That's a select board level conversation and board of assessors level of conversation with town meeting, and that is probably one of the most important political conversations a community can have. People in my position implement what you guys decide.
Town meeting votes the budget, so they vote the size of the pie. How that's divided is based on the makeup of the industrial and the commercial and the residential.
Matt, I guess my question actually was past versus future. Have those discussions already occurred at Board of Selectmen level?
No,
Okay, that's it. That's the answer I was looking for, one way or the other. Thank you.
And I have one more quick question. You mentioned emergency, the annual communications equipment cost or whatever. Can you just talk about that for 1 second and tell me what we got for an expense there?
so I've already put it in my draft budget. I will escape that document. So it's going to be about $13,000 a year in terms of maintenance, and about $9,600 a year for rental space on one of the communication towers on the Webster-Douglas line. This is what happens when you go from, basically the analog world to the digital world. We're not going on completely digital, but we are going microwave, and it's more expensive, more complicated, and it has to be maintained.
And so this is going to be in the fire and emergency services budget, or is it going to be put into the town budget?
Well, that's all the town budget, but I'm going to put this up in an account called 291, Civil Defense. And I feel kind of strongly about this. There are functions that cross both police and fire, and neither department should have unfettered control over. And I would throw highway in the mix as well. That includes communication. So that central core asset, the ability to talk to each other when you're in the field, needs to be broken away from the departments and put into one place where it can be tracked and managed and from time to time updated as it needs to be.
Okay, so Matt, are you finished with your slides, or do you have another one yet?
I'm done.
Okay, anybody have any questions for Matt at this point? Well, I do, so I'm going to just take my mask off a minute here. So Matt, let's say I'm the police chief. I think the police chief is up at our next meeting. So as all the department heads start working on their budgets, is there a basic number they can at least start with? I mean, I know some of the revenue stuff we won't know until the state lets us know and so on, but if we said to all the department heads, look, plan on a 2%, I'm just picking a number, and work on that, and then when they come to us, they have the spreadsheet that's based on, say, a 2% increase, with the understanding that that might change later depending on what the actual revenue number is. Is there like a baseline they can at least start with, so when they come to see us, we have kind of a ballpark of their budget, or not? I mean, what's your sense on that?
I really think that's a choice for, I'm going to actually stop that. That's a choice for FinCom,
Okay.
right? You want to approach it. I've done it every different way, Mr. Chairman. So in the past, I went to department heads in a larger community, and I said, you know, you're always cut before you even start. So why don't you just tell me what you need to run the place? And I really upset my governing board doing that, because the number came in, it was way higher. It was like a 6% year over year, and they all wanted to kill me. And I said, well, this is the hard work, right? We're going to make sausage now, right? We're going to get that 6% down to whatever you think you want to. Another way to do it, which is equally responsible, is to say, well, if revenues are only going 2%, then look at your budget. You have 2% to your bottom line. And if almost all of that's taken up by your personnel compensation, you don't have much room to move in your expenses. I leave that up to you and how you want to do it. I think that having some filter teases out of your department heads what is really important to them to do.
Yeah.
On the other hand, it may be educational for you as a committee to hear what they say they need. Just, you have to know as a group that you're not going to be able to accommodate all the needs of all the departments.
Yeah, so again, fellow committee members, tell me what you think of this, but I was thinking if we said to all the department heads, when you come to see us, have sort of two things ready. One is your budget at a 2% increase over your bottom line, and however you divvy it up, it's up to you, whether you spend it on this or that. I mean, we're not going to micromanage at that level. But at the same time, have another list, I'll call it a wish list, that might be the wrong phrase, but in case revenues come in higher, then we also have something that you say, yeah, I really wanted that extra thing, but under that 2% cap, it wasn't realistic. But just in case we do get more money, that's a good thing. So what do you guys think? As we have the department heads come to us, we want to give them a heads up and say, look, come with a 2% or a 3% or a 1.5%, or not. I mean, I'd love to hear your opinion. So I better just go around the table. Howard, what do you think? What's a good way to instruct our department heads?
Can I make a comment first?
Sure.
The only thing that I would suggest is that you allow for the contractual increases based on the current staffing levels of the department first.
Okay.
Not limit that to
Yeah.
the 2%, because that may be different. And then look at the 2% on the expense side as just a point of reference, because, you know, you may have people that are jumping from probation to step and they get a
Yep.
COLA on top of that. You may not be able to sustain the 2% within the salary piece of that.
Got that, yeah.
So that's my only comment.
So what do you think, Howard, in terms of instruction when they come to us? Any?
Well, I'm going to defer till near the back end of other input. I've got my thoughts, but
Okay.
I don't want to strong-arm other people's thoughts.
Okay. How about you, Sandy? What do you think? What instructions should we give the department heads when they, like the police chief meets us in 2 weeks? Should we give him any kind of ballpark and what, for a number or
I
not?
would hope that they would come with maybe what do you minimally require, like, you know, what is your most urgent need, maybe, and number rate them, or, but not so much give them a number to hit, but just say, you know, because you really, because of staffing and how many increases we're going to see this year, we almost can't allow for that 2% growth. So you don't really, in my opinion, can really only, because we don't have all this revenue for new growth yet. We don't have that yet.
Right.
So at this point, I think we're still at status quo where you just want them to say what they really, really need and rate that.
Okay.
That's my opinion.
Len, what do you think? Any thoughts on the homework the department heads?
I feel like when they come in, they're pretty, I feel like they come in with their list of priorities as to what's most important already. And, maybe just giving them, like you can't ask for a 6% increase, but, give them a finite number. But I feel like they do a good job prioritizing what's really important and what they need already. From what I remember in past years. Am I wrong?
I don't think so, but, so Matt, historically, were they given kind of an upper limit to work with, though? Like, you guys got 2%, do the best you can, or not?
Yeah, historically, a lot of this has been filtered through me, right? Because I was presenting to the select board a budget that was balanced when I presented it. So typically, I would tell them, look, let's look at your personnel, regardless of your steps, because it's still money. So if your overall budget is going to grow by 2%, because your revenue went up by 2%, and we have insurance and retirement, all these other things that suck out a lot of the money, a lot of the energy out of the budget. Really, in terms of where will we end up with these guys to balance the budget, is more like a 1.5. And after they do their compensation, they almost never have anything left. That's the situation we've been in. It's not necessarily the situation we'll be in, say, by fall town meeting. So teasing out some of what they see as low-hanging fruit that they really need to do might be a useful exercise. That's why I'm a little bit reluctant to filter it all through me all the time, because then I own it too, right? And it's hard to unpack months of thinking when we present a budget like that.
Okay. All right, let's keep going. Heather, what do you think in terms of instruction to the department heads when they come to us? You have any ideas on that?
Well, I think that obviously they're going to have to fund their personnel first. And then, that's going to eat up if it's going to be like a 2%, which is historically what they've been at. It's like 1.5%, 2%, and then have them go from there and prioritize what they need. Aside from the office supplies and stuff like that, what else do you need to run your department?
Okay, Mike, what do you think?
I'm kind of like in Matt's corner with this. I tend to approach budgeting, where I come from as a finance guy in that similar fashion. What do you need to run your programs effectively? Kind of give me the full list of it, and then, if we need to make some tough choices because our revenue number is only increasing X percentage, so therefore our expenses can only increase so much to match that, then that's where, like Matt says, that's where the rubber meets the road and the tough choices need to be made. That's kind of my approach to budgeting that I do in my professional life. I would kind of follow suit, because otherwise then you're just doing a mathematical equation, right? It's like third grade algebra. If you say, well, my revenue's going up 3%, so my expenses can go up that, and you're just kind of backing into your number. You're really not budgeting. You're just saying, well, this is what I got to play with, and I'm going to have to, just rise with the tide, so to speak. Whereas if you look at that big picture and you go, okay, well, we really need something, maybe it's a high priority in the police budget or the fire budget, and yet maybe there's some cuts. And again, I'm not projecting this, I'm just kind of picking numbers, throwing things out there as an example. But, if you need a high priority item in the police and fire budget, but maybe there's something in the highway department budget that could get cut out this year to compensate for that. Again, those are some of the tough choices that I think need to be made during the budget season. But So I wouldn't limit anybody and say, well, stay within the confines of a 1.5% or 2% increase, and everything else, keep to yourself, or, filter out so we don't see it. We can't make any of those decisions. We can't give an opinion on any of that type of stuff if we're not aware of it. So that's my take.
Okay. Phil, any comments?
I guess I would say I'm all for probably everything that's been said so far. I would love to see standardized line item numbers in budgets, and then historical numbers of spends, not budgeted numbers, but actual spends, so we could gauge the growth, or when they had really bad years, good years, whatnot. I don't know, Matt had talked about some standardized, or I think maybe even Dick, you talked about standardized budgeting forms, or some kind of easy way to compare and to get some historical understanding of what's going on. But realistically, the departments, will have emergencies, or they'll have things that they have to address, and that's why I think we're here, and that's why Gene and Matt do their job. So, yeah.
Okay, Howard.
So Matt, I'm unclear on actually not just one comment you've made, but the second comment. And I respect particularly the second comment seemed to be a suggestion that you were not all that excited about how much input you've had historically, and we're prepared to defer some of that. But I guess it's been my experience in the years I've been on this committee that for the most part, the department budgets come to us already practically, effectively prepackaged in a master plan, a master set of numbers already anticipated, and if you will, prepackaged effectively between BOS and your office. And that for us, we see those numbers, the large number, the department may come in front of us and say, look, we need to spend $8 on this and $5 on that versus $6 on this and $7 on that. But Matt, to Dick's original question, I was somewhat confused when you seemed to be suggesting that there was an option to have FinCom theoretically take more of a lead, and your second comment seemed to suggest you were open to having someone take more of a lead, but it seems to me that it still comes down to us through BOS. The departments look to satisfy BOS in your office before they really look to satisfy us. I think in the years I've been on the committee, I don't think we've ever gotten a town meeting having pitched any segment of a budget materially different than what Board of Selectmen that night line item is pitching. So are we determining the budget, or is your office in conjunction with BOS determining it? And with all respect to what you might want or might say, wouldn't we really need BOS to be ready to defer? And I don't have any perception that they are, nor do I have a perception that the departments, without a direct, specific statement from BOS, that the departments are ready to make that structural change.
Couple of thoughts. One is things get more centralized the more challenging your environment is. When we have a crisis, we defer to the National Incident Management System, and we have a very rigid top-down form of management because that is what the situation calls for. And when I started here, you were up against it, right? You were going to close the library, you'd make a number of changes in order to balance the budget if you could not get an override. And then in the context of the override vote, a number of really significant promises were made by the select board about what would happen, how they would sustain the town's budget if the override were to pass. And now we're at the end of that original 5-year forecast period. And the economic fortunes of the town have turned around. I'm not the fiscal, the economic. You have interest in development of properties in your territory. You grow or die in capitalist municipal government. If you don't grow, you will not have the resources you need to provide services because the cost of the services go up. So what's happening now, the transition that I see, is there is a lot more room for consensus building and a consensus-based model for budgeting rather than the tight fiscal control that we needed to navigate those difficult waters. The most important thing at the end of a crisis is to give up all the extra control as quickly as possible and get back to a healthy, robust dialogue and choiceful meetings where people have been selected to participate in the process have a meaningful way to engage and control the process. 6 years ago, you were getting blood from a stone, right? It was, who's going to go part-time this year, the building official or the Concom guy, you know? And you made the right choices. You survived. You didn't bankrupt the town. You didn't go into extreme financial duress. You got close, but you didn't get there. But now it's just different. There's going to be more resources around, the pie is bigger, and at that point, it's time for the process to be much more open and transparent for everybody.
Well, Matt, at the risk of having your eyes eaten out by bees, we're not being given the information we need to be able to make sound fiscal decisions. We're just not. And while I respect the comment that you've got an interest in having there be more openness, until BOS is prepared to provide that openness, I can't give a projection and start to analyze on a macro level when I'm not allowed access to the information that would let me get a better grip on what I can anticipate, whether it's roads needing 1.1 million or any other piece of that. It's great to have someone come in and tell me what they need for FY 2023, but if I can't anticipate what they might need for 2025, I'm not the guy to do it versus the person that's got the information with regard to 2025. How could I substitute my one-year view for somebody's judgment who's got a 3-year view?
I just spilled water all over my desk, I'm sorry.
Well, watch out for the bees.
The whole idea of giving you the Sharepoint and the access to it is you'll have access to all the documents. Nobody needs to know exactly which brand is going to be put on the outside of a warehouse wall.
Fair.
You don't need to know that. And we have confidentiality agreements that we have to honor because, but in terms of, so what evidence do you have that these projects are actually going? Well, look, we got a $3 million grant. We've spent $500,000 in engineering. There are purchase and sales agreements floating around everywhere. They're being discussed ad nauseum. We went to town meeting with a whole bunch of warrant articles for eminent domain and to sell property. And there's ample evidence that there really isn't much else left to show that these projects are going forward, except for the day at the ribbon cutting, there's going to be a brand on the outside. A brand that you will know because nobody's building these buildings if they're not already very successful. But as for all the rest of it, I intend for it to be at the Sharepoint. When you ask a question, I intend to have it there in document form so that you can see it without us having to run around, make photocopies, or tell you we're looking into it. It's going to be there for you at all times. Whenever you sign into your account, no matter where you are in the world, if you have the internet, you'll be able to get into your town account and see your Sharepoint.
Then before we do that work, is it your perception that the FY23 budget would be drafted in concurrence with BOS, or BOS would be doing their own?
See, I think the burden on the town administrator and the select board, them as the chief executive and me as their administrative officer, is to do our best college try to refine the product that's being discussed by people. But as we've discussed before, Howard, the finance committee writes the budget. That's your article in the warrant. You are a subcommittee of town meeting, and only town meeting can approve the budget. So my objective is to try to keep everybody on the same page, keep information flowing as accurately and as quickly as possible so people make good decisions. But a consensus-based model is so much more successful than having people square off on this department versus that department, or this budget versus that budget. We've had a good consensus-based approach to date because we've had scarce resources. Now the resources are somewhat more easy to get to. How do we keep that consensus going? And I think the first stop on that is that the committee that writes the budget and presents it at town meeting should not be a rubber stamp. You should be involved in conversations with people and hear about what their concerns are.
Have we
Culturally,
got,
many of your department heads are so used to having to just cut, just to balance their, just to make it, that it's ingrained, right? It's ingrained. They're not used to asking you for what they need because they knew in the past that they would never have a chance to get it. And now that chance may be arising in the next, if not this year, the next 3 or 4 years. We have to train our department heads to work through the budget process and ask for extra funds.
have we got, as Finance Committee, the ability to prohibit Board of Selectmen from proposing a budget to town meeting?
No.
Thank you, Howard.
Okay.
So my concern, everybody, is, again, just to take the police chief, because he's coming first. If, let's say he called me up tomorrow and said, hey, Dick, I'm working on my budget. Do I have any kind of cap? And I say, no, you don't. You ask for whatever you want. Great. And then we have,
Doesn't mean we get it.
and then we have to tell him in April, sorry, of 10 things you wanted, you can get 2 of them. So what I would rather do, again, I said it before, is give all the department heads a rough parameter with the understanding that it might be richer than they thought. But to simply say, oh, no, there are no limits. You ask whatever you want. Matt, is that helpful? I mean, because nobody gets whatever they want, right?
Well, it's fair, right? If you know where you're going to end up, then disclose that to the people that are going to make proposals to you and let them sort it out.
But if I'm the fire chief, I don't know where I'm going to end up if I'm told, ask for whatever you want. I mean, the implication is I might get it all, right, or not?
It should be more what you need.
I assume that these conversations were happening all along, and that they're all obviously going to put forth budgets based on risk and or need anyway, without us, even instructing them. So, isn't this a lot of like extra words for not much action?
Right.
Aren't they doing this behind the scenes anyway?
So Matt, you were going to answer my question. You were shaking your head.
That's what I don't want anymore.
Yeah.
I don't want behind the scenes. And I especially don't want that if more than one committee is going to talk to somebody. Something happened last year that kind of spun me around, and I really didn't like it, which is we were deep in the budget process, and then department head came before the finance committee and was asked, well, do you have what you need? Right? We've already been through months of massaging the budget as department head and town administrator and select board, and now this guy's being given the opportunity to advocate for something above and beyond what had already been refined. And that is not a good place to be. There's no good way out of that conversation, right? Because the department head was like, yeah, I do need stuff, but I'm not going to get it this year. So am I going to waste the FinCom's time, or am I going to say it and then make everybody upset with me because they thought they'd already dealt with the issue? So that's why I'm talking about trying to consolidate the process a bit, where I don't engage in a real strong hand. I don't need to. There should be some revenue out there that allows these budgets to grow. The final balancing act should be something that, hopefully, being rational people and having a data-driven process, we may not agree on everything, but most of the people involved in the process, whether they're approving the budget or implementing it, would see the logic of going in a certain direction and arrive at that conclusion before May.
So I'm just thinking of, again, the police chief, because he's first. So the chief is before us, and we say, okay, chief, we're talking about your budget, getting ready for the town meeting. What will he have for us? Will it be, here's my current budget with a 2% increase, not counting personnel, because I think that's probably realistic? Or will it be, here's my wish list? Matt, what's your sense of what's more realistic for him?
We don't have anybody right now who is so broken in their operations that they have some great reservoir of unmet needs.
Okay.
That's not happening, right? We don't have highway guys driving trucks with no floors. That may happen in Rhode Island. It doesn't happen here. You're not bad off. So, I'm looking for these folks to say, if I could buy it tomorrow because I had a little extra money, I would get a fingerprint machine, or I would get an enhanced level of access on a federal database that right now I can't afford to have, or extra training for, I want to bridge my part-timers over to being full-time cops, and that's going to cost X. I'm looking for my professional chief to tell me what his priorities are in some reasonable amount of order. And he'll know that he can't ask for 5% because there isn't 5%. The COLA in his contract is 2%. In his union's contract is 2%.
Matt, the conversation that occurred last year that you said flipped you around, was that at the public hearing or in the meeting with the department on our FinCom schedule?
So the other thing that happens in the winter is nobody's fault. You get bad weather. So the department head meets with the Board of Selectmen before they meet with you. And then there's a snowstorm, or you don't have a quorum, or something happens, and it's several weeks before you're able to punch the ticket, right? You said you wanted to meet up with all the department heads, now you catch up with the last group. But they've already been through the process, right? They're pretty much all done with the select board with me, and now they're in front of you, and they're getting open-ended questions. But that's nobody's set out to have that situation arise. I think if you look over the last 3 years, this has been rough. A snowstorm knocks us out because we're meeting every week. On our side, we're meeting with the select board one week and you guys the next. So we're here every Tuesday going through the budget process. So if we miss a couple of steps, things get a little bit jumbled up.
But I guess to your point of suggesting that you think it's time for FinCom to be able to get a larger share of the debate, is it already too late for this fiscal year? Does that have, in other words, what you just said, right? Your job and our job run parallel, but you're working a full work week and we're working for a couple hours every other Tuesday night. And so there's no question by the March folks coming in that if you're doing your job well, and you are, you and BOS are ahead of us. And so one can't, it's not fair for the department, like you said, to have to try to address two different masters. How do we get that timing and that process better if, a big if, we're going to have FinCom be more than a rubber stamp?
guess in a way, I'm trying to gently nudge you to step up and lead a budget writing committee, but also be part of a consensus. There's a whole bunch of things going on, Howard. I mean, between procurements and all this grant administration, there's a heavy workload on our side, and it would be good if we had some extra support from a committee. The other thing is, I could work 160 hours a week. I don't have authority to do squat. Town meeting votes the budget, and you guys are an organ of town meeting. So all the well-laid plans of any town administrator anywhere amount to nothing if you can't persuade people to see your point of view, if there's a decision to be made and it's important. But other than that,
Touché, fair.
you know, I would.
We've had that discussion in the last couple of years.
Yeah.
I think having access to this new system helps give us information so that we don't have to see it or what, you know, like we can log in and look at what Matt's doing and see projections and just have more input because we can actually see the numbers.
Jean, you have a comment or not?
I do. One, I don't think the Board of Selectmen, correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, they are not meeting with the departments this year.
I think we're trying to avoid that.
Okay. So the departments were becoming, a couple of years ago, we had them meet with both committees, both the Board of Selectmen and the Finance Committee. They are not doing that this year. They're strictly coming to the Finance Committee. I do have the draft schedule in front of you and the order they're becoming.
Bear with me, if I may.
Sure.
Can interrupt what you
Yeah.
just said. Clarity. Are they nonetheless submitting proposals to your office, Matt?
Yeah, they should be, same time as you, and I'll share them with the select board.
So it's a lot of timing issues. You're suggesting that there are no more direct meetings right now with BOS, with the department heads, and that the map that the departments are submitting for a proposal is now going simultaneously to you as it is to us.
Yeah.
Is that what I'm hearing? Even if that's a mid-March department head meeting because of snow or whatever, you may not get I mean, we've got the school committee on here. They thought they were
March
very late.
22nd, yeah.
You're not seeing the school numbers till the end of March?
They have their process too, though.
Yeah, I know, yeah.
We did request that they submit their budget to us by the end of February. So we may have the document before they present before the Board of before they present to the Finance Committee, but you would also get that information through Sharepoint because we would have it. So we would put it up on Sharepoint. So the budget may come before the committee does, in the case of the school committee, and if I get BBT. That information, I don't know if I'll have it, but it would go up to the SharePoint first.
What budget?
Either BBT's budget or the Douglas Public School.
Okay, but not the macro budget to be submitted to the town.
No,
That
it
would
would be a departmental request.
That will now theoretically come from this
Correct.
committee versus the Board of Selectmen.
The departmental request,
Matthew, is that correct?
Gene and I, as the people who are staffing, are going to continue to update this spreadsheet continuously so you can view it and see where you stand in terms of hitting a balanced budget target. Before I get my 5 bosses mad at me, I want to be clear
Yeah,
that they set the priorities, right? So I had 2 slides there with bullet points.
yeah.
Those were my recommendations in terms of prioritization. But they're the ones who will make the decisions. Okay, of all those bullet points, Matt, you're going to work on 3 of those things. And that's a directive from a policymaking board that I think we all have to acquiesce to.
I now can see your feet walking the tightrope. Got it. Got it, I'm good.
So Jean, you were going to,
so
Thank you, Matt.
yeah.
as information comes in, especially on those fixed items, and I consider Worcester Regional a fixed item. So when I get the allocation, we have the gross number, but I'm waiting for the water, sewer, and the other piece to be, ironed out of there. That number will be plugged in. So as information comes in, it will be updated to the spreadsheet. Going back to the chief, he's being first. I did speak with him. I expect that he's going to come into you with a budget. I think it's going to be contractual first with the expense. The groundwork for the expense is already in the Sharepoint. So the departments do have some baseline in there. I would not limit their list of things that they need because, just like Adam, and it just stands out, every year he would come in with this list, and every year he would accomplish something, but something else would roll up. But I think it's important that you see the list.
Exactly. That's why I was saying that they should come in with a list so that we see it.
It may not all be accomplished in FY23,
Yes.
but I think it's just as important to know that, hey, this may be in '24, this may be in '25. No different than me at home.
Right.
I have a list of things I want to accomplish. If I have $100, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, and then
Yes.
next year with that $100, I'm going to do the next 3 things.
Right.
So I don't know that I would necessarily limit.
I feel like they do that. I feel like that's how it's been presented by some of these departments
Right.
every year.
Right.
And who's first on the list? Police chief?
The
And
police-
when is that?
Well, that is in your email, the schedule I sent out today.
It's our next meeting.
2 weeks, right?
Yeah. So you have the police chief and you have the Bob and Eric, who's the economic development. Now, you will notice 2 departments are actually missing from this, mine and Matt's. So, we'll fit those in. Some of them, again, are fixed costs because a lot of what, legal is one of them, property and liability insurance, health insurance, like those are all going to be worked in. You're not going to really have a presentation because they're based on the current census or an assessment. So you'll have some of those gaps filled in already.
Matthew, are you meeting with us on each of these nights?
Yes, actually, my intention is to attend every meeting, and when you guys are done asking your questions, I'll probably have some to ask.
What I would then, unfortunately, it's kind of like a deposition that never ends. I would like to then have the opportunity to have 20 minutes of your time after the department heads have completed their meetings for the evening to get your thoughts where you think that fits on the macro budget, what you think was reasonable within numbers you project, et cetera. Then we can start to, you're the guy that's got the larger picture frame than any of us could possibly have. So we may hear it all, hear what they want, but you're the guy that can help us get an idea, of where it might fit in. Does that make sense, folks?
Yes.
And that may make for a few longer meetings, unfortunately, but that's my view of how we've got to borrow off the 160 hours of work a week you're doing. Now 164. But you've got 4 hours off.
So does everybody agree then that we're just going to trust our department heads to have a built-in conservatism when they come before us with their budget, that they're not right away going to say, oh, I'm going to ask for a 15% increase?
They can come in with anything they want to ask for.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
They can be all over the place. One can be conservative and one can be liberal. It's our job to determine where it fits in.
I think you'll have a base. I think you'll have base on the current staffing. The funny thing is, we've all been trained because we were here in 2008. You don't have any new department heads. I think there'll be a wish list, especially on the public safety and the highway. I think there's been, there was one thing, Phil, back to your point earlier, the piece that you were missing back in those days with the capital. We didn't do it. So, as things improved, that's where we started improving. And I always used to say this, if I had my wish, we would have budgeted $200,000 a year for extraordinary capital, something that was not in anybody's particular budget, did not meet the needs of capital, but would rotate in, again, doing those things that just didn't meet that $10,000 threshold, but it wasn't going to overly inflate an individual department's budget. We never had the money to do that. So now it's kind of built in. And, maybe this year, the chief comes in and says, I want this, and it's like 10,000, and next year, the highway department says something, I want this, that's 10,000, you just rotate that money, around. So it'll be interesting. It'll be different, but interesting.
Yeah, and I think, and Matt's right, we are an agent of the town meeting, so it's our budget that we give to the town meeting. And I think we have to be sensitive what we'll sell at the town meeting, too. I mean, if we come to the town meeting with an 8% increase on the budget, just to pick a number, because all the departments are just thinking they have this carte blanche.
Well, you're limited. You can only increase the budget by the size of the pie. You can only go up 2.5% plus new growth unless you're using the source of free cash. So
And does everybody know that?
Like I said, you're not, if I say something, they can almost finish my sentence.
Okay.
At least from my perspective.
All right.
And you can test the chief. I mean, you can queue up something and he can finish how I'm going to respond. The budget is limited to, you have to have a balanced budget at the end of this. So unless you're infusing free cash, there is a stopgap. You can go up 2.5% plus new growth, estimated receipts, the increase in state aid. You're looking at those variances to how you can increase the budget. So there is, now how you divvy up that increase, or how, whether 2.5%, whether or not you give more to the school or more to the police, or, you divvy up, but there is a stopgap there.
Okay, any other questions for Matt or Jean on this part of the agenda? Anybody? Overview of the budget process. And then, Matt, on the agenda, letter C, I have SharePoint. You kind of talked about that already, so I don't think we need to talk about that anymore, or do you want to say anything more about SharePoint?
I have only one comment that Phil made about the integrity of the historical numbers. Phil, when you open the budget spreadsheet, every year prior to the year we're in, those are audited numbers. So it gives me the audited numbers, and I put them into the spreadsheet. And then I check with her and make sure they're all correct. So that's when you look at those numbers, those will be actual spends. The only year that will be a budget year is the year we're in, and the year we're looking to budget for.
We're going to wrap it up pretty soon.
Excellent. Yeah, I'm sure I'll get used to it.
Lynn.
Okay, how we doing, everybody? We're going to try to wrap things up here. So Matt, anything else on SharePoint? That's a no, okay. If you look at the next thing on the agenda, everybody, it's revenue projections. Jean, anything you want to add?
No, like I said.
You sent us stuff?
I did send you some information, which is back up to some of the gross numbers that Matt showed on the spreadsheet. If you have any questions at the next meeting, you can ask, but it was really just a supporting documentation.
Okay. So we have that from Jean. She has some information on revenue projections. So look those over, and then if you have any questions for her, you can contact her. Anything else that we need to talk about?
And if I can just remind you that if you have any specific, you now have the agenda for the departments that are presenting. If there's anything specific that you would want from the department, I would ask that you give us at least a week notice so I can notify them. And you can send any requests to the chair.
Okay. So Matt, you think the SharePoint will come up in a day or two then? You think we'll get those emails?
Yes.
Okay. Anybody else? Any items?
Yes.
Howard?
So matters not reasonably anticipated before this meeting.
Yeah.
I'd now like to have a discussion about Matt's comments regarding the budget and the amount of time we would put in, both ourselves and the department heads, and still have Board of Selectmen be presenting and proposing a budget. It will be the budget that will be voted on at town meeting. And so one of the important comments Matt made just now was you have to be able to present and pitch and persuade folks at town meeting that you've got the correct budget to submit.
Right.
And I think we've all got to be prepared that when you get to town meeting, there are 5 folks up on the stage who have been voted in by the townspeople to do the work, to present a budget, and now they're being paid a little more even to do that work. You have folks sitting with their backs to the crowd in chairs that then would also try to present a alternative budget. And that's a lot of persuasion, Mr. Chairman, to try to create and propose at town meeting a different budget than the budget presented by Board of Selectmen. There is no scenario in the world that I'm aware of, unless Matt knows differently, where Board of Selectmen is not going to be presenting their own budget based on their review and their work with Matt to create that budget. And all the work you want to do in the next 2 months to bring the department heads in and get their wish lists and go through with a fine-tooth comb what you would like to present, it's only effective if you can sell it at town meeting when Board of Selectmen is presenting something different. So we've all got to be aware of that. And unless there's some kind of proposal for a merger at some point between the Board of Selectmen positions and the FinCom positions, you're talking about trying to run a competing budget by vote at town meeting. And at the moment, unless you do it for 6 years in a row, losing for 5 years in a row, before the 6th year, the town realizes, hey, those folks with those budget proposals are doing a good job, and I wish we had had that hindsight 2 or 3 years ago, you're not going to win those votes for a few years. So just be prepared, Matt, unless you think there's a merger event somewhere in late March.
I guess, I want to be clear. It is my impression, my understanding, when you read the statutes, the Finance Committee proposes the budget.
I have no doubt they do.
Right, so
What statutes are you talking about, Matt?
No, the finance,
these are all in.
the finance committee does present the budget. They make the motion at town meeting
understand all
floor.
of
It
that.
is the finance committee. But we have always presented as part of the document 2 columns. The FinCom
Right.
makes the motion, but if the BOS budget is different, their column would be listed as well as yours.
And
But they would have to make the motion on the floor to change your motion, though.
Right.
Yours is the one presented to the taxpayer.
Right. And so that may be the subtlety, but that still isn't going to be a winner.
But you're saying ours is on the warrant, basically, with the recommendations.
And then the BOS says we're making a motion to approve our budget. And it's different. And that motion's going to carry 77 to 23.
You think so?
I do. Clearly.
That's the process, right? They can do that. Any member of town meeting can stand up and offer alternative numbers. The select board certainly can study more than the typical resident might and have more information. But what I'm trying to acknowledge trying to come up with a process that everybody's comfortable with is that at the end of the day, it's your budget.
Got it. Okay.
It's based on it has our recommendations on it. It's not our budget, though. And my understanding was it was the Board of Selectmen's budget. It was our recommendations are on the budget.
No, Matt's
Executive-
correct. Matt's
executive
correct. It's
presents you
our
the budget.
budget. I'm not missing that point.
No, that's true. But anybody can make a recommendation to change your motion.
But to spend, I don't mind spending the time. I really am uncomfortable. And Matt made the point, right? That late in last year's process, he was faced with a proposal, a question on the floor to a department head, what would you like though? And while that may not be as upsetting for Matt or the person raising the question, it might raise unrealistic hopes for the person being asked the question, even if it wasn't intended to, perhaps. And so that's a hard part of this. You're asking the committees to come in and the departments to come in and ask us for whatever we want, or they want, to a point. And like you said, Gene, they all know the constraints. I don't mind proposing an alternate budget, but I wish there were a way that there were a consolidation of the two efforts, so you got to one budget. I've yet to see that.
Without making it formal though, Howard,
Yep.
Mr. Chairman, through you to Howard,
Yeah.
without making it formal, that is what we're trying to do. We're trying to build consensus
Fair enough.
around what's relevant, what's not relevant, and hopefully, when we get to May, there won't be material disagreement over what's in the budget. You just have-
Aren't those, I'm sorry to interrupt, but aren't those decisions supposed to be handled by the people who get elected by a council? They're the ones who decide the priorities, right?
No, no.
So let me share a couple of things, because I've worked for the United States Senate and I've worked for a state governor. The President of the United States presents a budget. It is dead the day it is published. It is irrelevant. The Ways and Means Committee in the House and the Senate Appropriations Committee write the budget. I don't even want to tell you how they do the budget in Rhode Island, but the governor doesn't even really submit one. He just puts a bunch of numbers down because nothing he says or she says will ever pass. All they do is put information on the table. Their numbers are never agreed to, ever. At the local level, we don't really want that, right? We want the people who work day to day to have a significant amount of input into how the budget is structured. But it's still the legislative body in the United States. The legislative body writes the budget and approves the budget. Town meeting is the boss, ultimately, of everything we do.
Thank you, Matt. Howard, anything else on
No,
that?
thank you, Mr. Chair.
When you talk about statutes, what statute are you referring to? I'm trying to understand where you guys are coming from, because prior to tonight's discussion, I was under the impression that the FinCom was basically an oversight committee that took the selectmen's budget and basically listened to the department heads and gave a thumbs up or thumbs down based on what the people might think.
No, the reverse is true. Phil, it's FinCom.
That's what I'm looking for.
It's FinCom's budget.
So Matt will send you the appropriate statute link, right, Matt? You can do that for Phil.
We'll
BOS
start at Chapter 39, Section 16, and you work from there.
Anybody else?
Sandy, do you have a motion?
I have a motion to adjourn.
We have a motion to adjourn from Sandy Kuiper, seconded by Phil. Did you second it, Phil?
I think Mike.
Oh, Mike seconded it.
Mike
Sorry.
did an hour ago.
Mike. Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstained? The motion carries unanimously.
Thank you all.
We are dismissed. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.